Wagon master led families west, until his own daughter was sold to the judge. The last loaf of bread was cracked like a skull, and his daughter ate it with her eyes. Elias Voss knelt beside the cot, the canvas tent trembling around them like a dying animal. Outside, the wind didn't howl, it screamed. A dust storm had swallowed the horizon 3 days ago, and since then, no wagon had passed. No water. No food. Just the slow, wet sound of his daughter's breathing, too thin, too quiet. Her name was Clara. She was 8 years old. And she hadn't eaten in 72 hours. He pulled the crust from his coat pocket. It had been wrapped in oilskin, kept warm against his chest. He'd saved it since they left Nebraska. Said he'd give it to her on the day they reached California. But California was a ghost now. The supply train had vanished 2 weeks back, stolen by men who wore badges and called themselves agents. They took the flour, the salt, the rifles. Left behind only silence and half-dead children. Clara lifted her head. Her lips were cracked, her cheeks sunken like hollowed-out apples. She didn't beg. Never did. She just looked at him, not with hunger, but with trust. As if he still held the whole world in his hands. "I'm sorry, baby," he whispered. She smiled. That broke him more than the thirst. More than the silence. Outside, the wind picked up again. Dust rattled the tent like pebbles thrown by ghosts. Somewhere in the dark, a horse snorted, weak, tired. One of the last two. The other had been shot yesterday for meat. He'd watched the man slit its throat, heard the gurgle, smelled the copper tang rising into the air. Then he'd watched the man eat it raw. Elias reached into his boot. There, tucked beneath the sole, wrapped in oiled cloth, were 5 silver coins. Enough to buy a canteen of water. Or a meal for 10. Or 1 child's passage to safety. The letter had come 2 nights ago, slipped under the tent flap while he slept. Written in ink so neat it looked like a sermon. "Mr. Voss, I am Judge Harlan Whitmore. I have need of a girl. Clean. Quiet. Under 10. You bring her to Fort Holloway by dawn. I will pay $50. And your party may pass unharmed through the Black Mesa corridor. No questions. No delays. H.W." He'd burned the letter. But the words stayed. $50. Your party may pass unharmed. He stared at the coin in his palm. Cold. Heavy. Real. And then he heard it, the softest click of a hinge. Clara had turned over. Her hand reached out blindly, fingers brushing his sleeve. "Papa," she murmured. He swallowed hard. His throat felt full of sand. "I'm here, sweetheart." She sighed. Like a bird settling into its nest. He closed his fist around the coins. Outside, the wind screamed louder. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote began to howl. Not in hunger. In mourning. He didn't move. Didn't cry. Just sat there, holding the last piece of bread in one hand, and the price of his soul in the other. The courtroom smelled like sweat and dried blood. Not from violence, not yet, but from the kind of decay that settles in wood when men have been sitting too long in silence, waiting for someone else to break first. Elias stood near the back, boots caked in dust from the trail, coat stiff with salt and sweat. His hands hung at his sides, empty. No gun. No hat. Just the hollow ache of a man who had already lost everything and was now here to pay the final bill. Judge Harlan Whitmore sat behind a desk carved from oak so old it might have grown beside the first wagon wheel to roll through this territory. His suit was black wool, pressed sharp enough to cut. His silver watch chain glinted under the single oil lamp. He didn't look up when Elias entered. Didn't need to. He knew. He opened the ledger. The pages crackled like dry bones. Each name was written in neat, looping script. Each followed by a number. A price. A date. Margaret Ellis, age 7, 40, sold to Dr. Loomis, New Mexico Territory, March 14. Thomas Reed, age 5, 35, traded for mules, Fort Kearney, April 2. Lillian Kane, age 9, 50, purchased by Mrs. Ellery, San Francisco, May 18. Elias's breath caught. There were 32 names. All girls. All under 10. All sold. Not kidnapped. Not stolen. Sold. Like cattle. Like land. Like whiskey. The judge flipped another page. This one, he said, tapping a line with his pen. Clara Voss. Age 8. Father, Elias Voss. Last known location, Dust Hollow Camp, along the Oregon Spur Condition, Fair. Health, declining. Willingness, unknown. He paused. Looked at Elias. Do you confirm this entry? Elias didn't answer. The clerk cleared his throat. The preacher whispered something under his breath. Clara didn't move. She just stared at the floor. Then, softly, so soft no one else heard, she spoke. I don't want to go. No one reacted. No one even blinked. The judge simply closed the ledger. Slowly. Deliberately. Then reached into his coat pocket. Produced 5 silver coins. Set them on the desk. Click. 1. 2. 3. 4. 5. Exactly what Elias had hidden in his boot. Exactly what he'd counted every night while Clara slept. The judge slid them across the wood. They're yours, he said. For your daughter. Elias didn't reach for them. His hand trembled. His throat burned. He thought of the bread. The last bite. The way she smiled like it was heaven. He thought of his wife's shawl tied to the cottonwood. He thought of the coyotes howling that night, not for food. For loss. And then he remembered something his father once told him, standing over a grave in Kentucky, years before the war, a man doesn't sell his child to live. He sells his child because he's already dead. The judge leaned forward. Do you understand what this means, Mr. Voss? This isn't charity. It isn't mercy. It's business. We're building a nation out here. And nations require labor. Clean hands. Quiet mouths. Children are cheap. And they grow fast. Elias looked at Clara. She met his gaze. No tears. No fear. Just, understanding. Like she'd known all along. Like she'd been waiting for him to say it. The sheriff shifted his weight. The preacher crossed himself. The boy with the ledger lowered his head. And then the judge did something no one expected. He took the 5 coins. Put them back in his pocket. Then pulled out a single gold piece. Set it down. $100, he said. For her. And for your silence. Elias didn't move. Didn't breathe. Didn't blink. The gold coin gleamed under the lamp. It was warm. As if it had been held by many hands. As if it had soaked up the cries of other fathers. Clara stood. Quietly. Walked to the bench. Picked up her doll. Then stepped toward him. She reached up. Touched his cheek. Her fingers were cold. Are we going home, Papa? She asked. He wanted to lie. He wanted to scream. He wanted to drop to his knees and beg God to strike him blind. Instead, he took her hand. And led her to the door. Behind them, the judge closed the ledger again. And wrote one final line. Elias Voss, paid in silence. No record kept. No guilt recorded. Outside, the wind picked up. Dust swirled around their boots. Clara didn't ask where they were going. She just held his hand tighter. And for the first time since the storm began, Elias didn't feel the sun on his skin. He felt the dirt beneath his nails. And he knew, he was already buried. They rode south. Not in a wagon. Not in comfort. But on a single mule, its ribs pressing against its hide like the bars of a cage. Clara sat behind the judge's man, a silent giant named Rourke, whose face was carved from leather and regret. He didn't speak. Didn't drink. Didn't look at her. Only stared ahead, toward the horizon where the earth cracked open like an old wound. She didn't cry. Not when they left the town. Not when the church bell rang for the last time. Not even when she saw the body hanging from the oak by the road, a boy, maybe 10, his tongue swollen black, his boots gone. She just held her doll. And watched the dust. It rose in slow spirals, curling like smoke from a funeral pyre. It settled on her eyelashes. In her teeth. Between her fingers. She let it stay. Because this dust remembered everything. It remembered the wagon train that passed this way last spring, mothers singing lullabies to keep their children asleep while the men prayed for rain. It remembered the girl who ran away 3 weeks before, barefoot, screaming for her mama, and how they found her bones 2 miles down the trail, picked clean by vultures and time. It remembered her. She dug her fingers into the dry earth as they passed a dead mesquite tree. The soil crumbled like ash. Beneath the top layer, something caught, a sliver of metal, half buried. She pulled it free. A button. Blue wool. Bent. Cracked at the edges. She knew this button. She'd sewn it herself, months ago, after her mother showed her how to thread the needle with twine and patience. It had come off her father's coat during the storm, when he carried her through the mud to the tent. She'd tucked it into her pocket that night, whispering, "I'll keep it safe." Now it was here. In the dirt. Where no one would ever find it. Except her. She pressed it to her chest, right over her heart. And for the first time since they took her. She cried. No sound. Just tears, hot and silent, carving paths through the dust on her cheeks. Rourke didn't turn. Didn't ask. He only slowed the mule. Let her dig. She kept digging. Found a root, thin, brittle, tasteless. She chewed it anyway. Let the bitter juice burn her tongue. It reminded her of the wild berries back home. Of summer. Of laughter. She thought of Papa. Did he miss her? Or had he already forgotten? Had he sold her because he loved her? Or because he hated himself too much to watch her die? The stars came out that night, endless, cold, indifferent. She lay on the ground beside the fire, wrapped in a blanket that smelled of horse and gunpowder. Rourke sat across from her, sharpening a knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. SHK, SHK. She closed her eyes. And whispered into the dark. Papa. I'm still here. The wind answered. Not in words. But in the sigh of sand sliding over bone. Somewhere, miles behind them, Elias walked. Barefoot. His boots were gone, traded for a canteen of water he never drank. He followed the trail not by hoofprints or wagon ruts. But by memory. By the scent of her hair, wild sage and sweat. By the echo of her voice saying, "Are we going home, Papa?" He hadn't slept in 4 days. His skin peeled in strips. His lips bled. He crossed rivers without crossing them, stepping on stones that shifted beneath him, nearly dragging him under. He passed graves. Dozens. All marked with nothing but sticks and stones. Some had names scratched into wood. One read, Little Mary. Died waiting for bread. He knelt there. Put his forehead to the earth. And screamed. No sound came out. Just dust. And then he saw it. A single blue button, caught on a thorn bush. Clara's button. He reached for it. Fingers trembling. Touched it. And collapsed. He didn't cry. He didn't pray. He just held it to his chest, the same place she had. And whispered into the night, I'm sorry. The coyotes answered. Not with howls. But with silence. Longer than any sound. Because some grief doesn't make noise. It just eats you alive. And somewhere, under a sky too wide to hold all the pain, Clara rolled onto her side. Pressed the button to her lips. And dreamed of home. Not the place. But the feeling. Of being held. Of being safe. Of being loved. Even if it was only a dream. Even if it was already gone. The brothel smelled like burned sugar and regret. Not the sweet kind that clings to a child's fingers after stealing jam from the jar, but the sour, sticky kind that lingers after a woman has cried too long and stopped caring if anyone hears her. The walls were paper thin, peeling in curls like dead skin. Oil lamps flickered on every table, casting shadows that moved when no one was there. Clara sat on a stool by the window, scrubbing a floor that had never been clean. Her hands were raw. Red. Cracked at the knuckles. She didn't whimper. Didn't flinch. Just kept scrubbing. Like if she worked hard enough, the dirt would wash away the memory of who she was. Rourke left her here 3 days ago. Didn't say goodbye. Didn't even look back. Just handed her to a woman with a cigarette dangling from her lips and eyes like empty wells. Name's Mabel, she'd said. You're mine now. You scrub. You smile. You don't ask questions. And you pray, not to God. To the men who pay. Clara didn't pray. She counted. Counted the footsteps on the stairs. Counted the coins dropped into the tin cup. Counted the seconds between breaths. And sometimes, when the night was quiet and the lamp oil low, she pressed her father's button to her chest and whispered his name. Papa. No one answered. But tonight, someone came. He walked in slow. Barefoot. Clothes torn. Face hidden beneath a week of beard and dust so thick it looked like he'd crawled out of his own grave. The men in the room fell silent. Even the piano stopped playing. Mabel stepped forward, cigarette smoldering between her fingers. You lost, stranger. He didn't answer. Just stared at Clara. Her hands froze on the mop. Her breath caught. It couldn't be. It was. His coat was gone. His boots were missing. His hair hung in matted ropes. But his eyes, those hollow, haunted eyes, they hadn't changed. They were the same eyes that had watched her sleep. The same eyes that had held the last piece of bread. Papa, she whispered. The word barely made a sound. But the room heard it. Every man turned. Every lamp dimmed. Mabel exhaled smoke through her nose. Don't know who this is, girl. But he ain't paying. So get back to work. Elias took a step forward. Then another. His feet left prints in the grime. He didn't reach for her. Didn't speak. Just stood there, trembling. Like a man who had walked across hell just to see if heaven still existed. Clara rose. Slowly. Set the mop down. Walked to him. No running. No crying. Just, coming home. She reached up. Touched his cheek. Her fingers brushed the stubble, rough as desert thorns. And then she did something no one expected. She leaned her forehead against his chest. And whispered, "Did you sell me for water?" The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was alive. It swallowed the music. It choked the laughter. It made the candles flicker like dying stars. Elias didn't move. Didn't breathe. His body shook, not from weakness. From the weight of truth. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. And when he finally spoke, his voice was sandpaper on stone. "I sold you, to keep you alive." She lifted her head. Looked into his eyes. And for the first time since the storm, she saw the thing he buried deeper than the gold coin. Guilt. Not shame. Not regret. Guilt. The kind that doesn't fade. That doesn't heal. That eats your soul until all that's left is a hollow shell wearing skin. "I'm still alive," she said. He nodded. Tears rolled down his cheeks, slow. Heavy. Silent. He reached into his pocket. With shaking fingers, pulled out 5 silver coins. Held them out. "They're yours," he said. She didn't take them. She just looked at his hands. Calloused. Broken. Empty. Then she reached up. Took his face in both palms. And kissed his forehead. Like a mother. Like a priest. Like a ghost forgiving the living. "I don't want money," she whispered. "What do you want?" he rasped. She closed her eyes. "I want you to remember me, even if I forget you." He broke. Right there. On the dirty floor. Sank to his knees. Let out a sound no man should ever make. A sob. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just, final. Like a horse collapsing under its own weight. Mabel lit another cigarette. Stared at the ceiling. 50 years I've seen men come through here," she said quietly. None ever came back. The men around them shifted. One spat on the floor. Another crossed himself. The preacher from town, the one who prayed over Clara's mother's grave, stood near the doorway. He hadn't spoken since Elias walked in. Now he stepped forward. Put a hand on Elias's shoulder. "Son," he said, voice cracked like old leather, "you can't carry what you've done. Not alone." Elias looked up. Through tears. At the preacher. At Clara. At the fire in the hearth, cold now. Embers glowing red. Waiting. But not burning. Because some fires don't consume. They just wait. To remind you. Of what you lost. Of what you chose. Of what you'll never get back. Clara turned. Walked back to the floor. Picked up the mop. Started scrubbing again. Elias stayed on his knees. Watching her. 4 hours. Until the lamps dimmed. Until the last customer stumbled out. Until the door clicked shut behind him. And the only sound left was the scrape of the mop. And the soft, steady beat of a heart still trying to believe in love. Mabel tossed him a blanket. And a cigarette. He didn't smoke. But he took it. Because sometimes the only way to stay alive is to let the smoke choke you slow. Outside, the wind began to rise. Dust swirled past the windows. Carrying the scent of sage. Of sweat. Of a little girl's prayers. And somewhere, deep in the dark, a coyote howled. Not for hunger. Not for blood. But for a father who finally understood, some things you can't buy. And some things you can't undo. Winter came like a funeral procession, quiet, inevitable, and colder than any man's promise. The snow fell for 7 nights straight, burying the railroad tracks, silencing the coyotes, and turning the world into a hushed cathedral of white. No trains rolled through Black Mesa anymore. No wagons creaked down the trail. Even the saloons shut their doors. Men stayed inside. Huddled. Waiting. As if the cold could be reasoned with. And then, one morning, just before dawn, a pair of boots appeared on the church steps. Not new. Not polished. Not even matched. One was worn leather, stitched with twine where the sole had split. The other? A child's boot, too small, stained with dust and dried mud, laces frayed but tied tight. They sat side by side, as if placed there by careful hands. No note. No name. Just the boots. Inside, the congregation stirred. The preacher stood at the pulpit, staring out the frosted window. He didn't preach that day. Didn't sing. Didn't pray. He just walked outside. Kneeled. Touched the boots. Picked them up. One by one. Carried them inside. Set them on the altar. No one spoke. No one moved. A widow wept softly. A boy whispered, "That's the wagon master's." They all remembered him. Elias Voss. The man who led them west. The man who lost his wife. Who sold his daughter. Who vanished. Some said he died in the desert. Others said he drowned crossing the river. But now, here were his boots. And something else. Tucked beneath the smaller one, a folded square of paper, brittle with frost. The preacher opened it. The ink was faded. Smudged. But legible. For the children. 5 silver coins. 1 for each soul I traded. I cannot bring them back. But I can pay for their silence. E.V. The preacher held the letter to the light. Then he turned to the congregation. $50, he said, voice steady as stone. He left $50. Not for himself. For them. He lifted the 5 silver coins from the folds of the larger boot. Each one gleamed under the weak morning sun streaming through the stained glass. He placed them gently on the communion plate. Then he stepped back. And for the first time since the wagon train broke apart, the church rang. Not with bells. But with silence. Deep. Full. Sacred. Outside, the snow kept falling. Covering the path he took. Covering the graves he passed. Covering the places where he knelt in the dirt and begged God for mercy. He didn't go to California. Didn't seek redemption in gold or glory. He walked north. Past the broken crosses. Past the ghost towns. Past the place where Clara's button still clung to a thorn bush. He carried no food. No water. No gun. Just the memory of her voice. Did you sell me for water? And the answer he finally learned, no. I sold you because I thought love meant letting go. But love doesn't mean letting go. It means holding on, even when your hands are broken. Even when your soul is ash. Even when the world says you're already dead. He died 3 days later. Found beneath a cottonwood tree, the same kind his wife was buried under. His body was frozen stiff. Face turned toward the sky. Hands curled around nothing. But tucked into his coat pocket, untouched by ice, was a single loaf of bread. Cracked. Dry. Old. Wrapped in oilskin. He'd carried it all this way. Not to eat. Not to sell. Just, to remember. To hold. To honor. Because sometimes, the most sacred thing a man can leave behind isn't money. Isn't land. isn't fame. It's the last thing he refused to give up. The thing that made him human. Even when he forgot how. That night, the children of the town dreamed. All of them. Together. In the same dream. They saw a man walking across an endless desert. No boots. No coat. Just bare feet on burning sand. In his arms, a little girl. She wasn't afraid. She was smiling. And in his other hand, he carried a loaf of bread. Not broken. Not stale. Whole. Warm. As if it had just come from the oven. And when they woke, each child found a button on their pillow. Blue wool. Bent. Cracked. But whole. And when they pressed it to their chests, they swore they heard wind. Whispering. Not in words. But in feeling. Like someone was saying, I'm sorry. I loved you. I never stopped. The next morning, the preacher took the boots. Placed them beside the altar. And carved 2 names into the wood beneath, Clara Voss. Elias Voss. Not as seller and sold. Not as father and daughter. But as 2 souls who loved each other, even when the world tried to make them forget. And every year, on the first snowfall, the children of Black Mesa leave a loaf of bread on the church steps. Not for the dead. But for the living. So they'll remember, that some men don't ride into the sunset. They walk into the storm. And leave behind only boots. And bread. And silence. And love, so quiet, so raw, it echoes louder than any gunshot.